So now we're into finishing and detailing stage here. For the most part, most of my stuff is pretty much done for clear coat work. Um, a lot of this stuff, when I do final details, again, I like a little bit of contrast. And rather than seal it in and kind of bury it, and then also you run the risk of losing some of your detail work to the clear coat, because it can reactivate it, especially with enamel, and you'll end up washing it out. I like to do it now with enamel. Enamel is pretty durable, so you don't have to worry about sealing it all the time. It's not always 100% necessary to completely seal it off. For this part, I'm going to be going through the black parts. Just do a really light dry brush for kind of an edge wear look. Since you can't panel line black, obviously with black it's not going to work, so I tend to do this just to give it a little bit more pop, so it's not just plain black. And I do it with Model Master aluminum. It's not quite as bright as the chrome silver. I want just a little bit of contrast, not a lot. I don't want it to really jump out too much. So I got a little stiff bristle brush that I use for this, and I just dip it right here into the cap, get a little bit on there, then try and get it down as dry as possible. I'll do real quick right here on the hand. Again, I'm not doing a real heavy brush, just enough to give it a little on the edges. I want it to stay black. And I just do quick flicks like that, just to catch the edge really. That's all I'm going for. And it's okay if it does that little smudge, I guess you would call it, kind of like edge wear. And I may come back also with my rat tail brush and do the same thing, just kind of line the edges a little. A lot of people forget the inside of the hands. I'll make sure I get those as well. But you can see, still black, but a little bit more of a detail to it. I'll run through all these black parts and do that. Try and hit as many of the edges as I can. Fairly simple. Do another one here on these hip joints. And these aren't highly visible, but it's really nice to get a little in there. Alarm clock. Oops. But fairly simple. Just go through and kind of give them a little bit of edge wear, a little bit more pop, so it's just not plain flat black. And again, don't really need to clear coat it. It's nice if you can. If it was brush on detail, then I might clear coat it just to keep it from chipping or flaking or rubbing off. But these little details like this, I'm kind of taking more of a less is more approach lately. I'm not going through and doing a whole lot of detail work. I think the amount of panel lining I'm I'm doing nowadays. It's enough to, rather than going through and putting all kinds of crazy details on this, it does tend to get a little cluttered, and I try to avoid that. Next up, we're gonna go through and wrap up the majority of the panel lining. Just a few parts that we didn't get when we did just the alt mode. And again, I'm doing this before I start my buffing, so you'll notice on some of these parts it's still got some orange peel, but I haven't done the final sanding on them yet. And slipping around here. Caffeine jitters. You see, I still prefer like keep it straight. If you haven't seen my panel lining tutorial, you can get a good idea of how I get this going again. Lots of ways to do this, but this is how I do it. And the beauty of using lacquer, that little smudge right there, I can get later, remove it. And you can see on these parts, I probably should have done the paneling on these before I did clear coat, because I did do these with the intention of buffing them. So the panel lines are a little bit narrower now. So it does make it a little bit more difficult to keep them straight. But again, like before, we're going to be sanding again. So most of that will get removed. Go through and finish up panel lining. We still got some Alclad left to do, and then buffing. This guy right here, obviously, that's a ton of paneling needing to do. And what I might also do is another way to break these weapons up too. I like to add some a little bit of glow effect and whatnot, but you can panel line with pretty much any kind of paint. I've got a True Blue Pearl over here. It's semi-transparent, but I'll also use this for some of the panel lines as well. Give it a little bit of extra pop. Kind of mix that in here and there. But I'm going to go through and do all that and then move on to the next step. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the micro polishing real quick. I got the hood here is more or less cured and ready to rock. So while I'm waiting for some other stuff to dry, I'm going to hit this one real quick and show you how this works. This is the Revell micro polishing kit. This doesn't come with it. I bought this separate. It's a Novus 2 polishing compound. But the Revell kit comes with a foam block that you can use also. We're not going to use it here, but as you can see, these are very, very, very fine grit. We got 3200, 3600, then it goes to 4000. Do it this way. It goes to 4000, then 6000, then 8000, then 12,000 grit. Most of your show cars and high-end sports cars and whatnot, I think they only sand up to 4000. I'm going to go up to probably 6, so I'll take these two and put them away. But you can see they're very fine. By the time you get to these, you're almost buffing with it. I guess they use these for polishing sunglass lenses, so I've heard. But so for this, we're going to start with the 3200. Set these aside. And you can see it's smooth, but it's still got a little bit of a tooth to it. So I'll set the polishing compound aside for now. You're also going to need a clean, lint-free cloth when it comes time to do the actual buffing. But I'll take these sheets, and I usually just fold them in half, get them damp, and you're just very lightly going to come in and start sanding with this guy first. Again, just like before, trying to avoid going over an edge. You almost just want to sand right up to it. And this is very gently. We don't want to sand through or clear. Work our way around. And this is where blending in your faction logo will come in play. The buffing will actually get rid of the raised edge that is created from the clear going over it. Every once in a while you gotta rinse your part because you are removing material. You don't want to leave that on there. Sand it very lightly. I'm putting very, very little pressure on here. And this will probably, more or less, this first one will go right through that last coat of the clear. Or the bulk of it anyway. See if I can blow this off real quick. I don't have my compressor hooked up at the moment, just my airbrush compressor. So now you can see that dull haze to it. You can see where it's kind of started to remove some of that orange peel. So that's with the 32. Next we'll go on to the 36. Get that one wet. Go at it again here. Again, we want to work up back to the battery die on me there. So, still on to the 36. Again, very minimal pressure. Put my glove back on. Sorry about that. I can feel it getting smoother as I go while I'm doing this. Clean this off and dry it real quick. You can see a lot more of the orange peel is gone now. It's getting smoother and flatter. It's getting pretty close to almost time to buff. I'm gonna go one more here and see how we look after this. We'll go to the 4000 now. See where this gets us. Sometimes, you know, if you completely eliminate it, then it's good to kind of stop there. You're sanding pretty fine anyway, so you don't need to keep going if you get to that point. Sometimes it helps too to change direction a little bit and cross it up. Okay, let's try this again. So, still on the 4000. Apparently the memory on my camera wasn't enough for a full shot this time. So, let's try this again. We're still on the 4000. Got a little bit more to do here. Hit up here towards this top section. But you can see on the spots that have already dried, there's almost no orange peel left. Very little. Getting closer and closer to a nice smooth surface, which is what we want for the polishing compound. Okay, a little bit more over here. This side needs a little more too. Again, we're not sanding over the edge, just right up to it. Got my compressor hooked back up. So now you can see there's very little orange peel remaining. And we'll go on to the 6. Now this ought to wipe out almost all of it. We're probably through, I'd guess probably 2 of the good heavy coats by now. We're getting closer and closer to that original tack coat now. So I think I'm going to stop after this. Move right into polishing. Alright, I'll blow this off. Now you can see the orange peel is more or less gone. There might be little tiny bits of it left, but by the time you buff this out, you won't see them anymore. So set this aside. I'll break out the Novus 2. Shake it up really good. And then you need a good, clean, lint-free cloth. You can see I've used this a little bit, but we'll use a clean side. Just a little dab. I kind of get it on there nice and thin. And you're just going to buff this out. See a little bit of it poking through, but not much. And if you do this and you still see some orange peel pitting or anything like that, you can always go back and sand it again. For now, I'm going to hit this center of the hood so you can see. You just buff until it's nice and glossy and the haze goes away. You can see it's getting pretty shiny now. You switch to a clean section every now and then. There you have it. Looks like I might have burned a little bit through the faction logo, but I am kind of going for a little bit of a weathered look. So, there you have it. And if you get a little bit in these panel lines, you can gently kind of brush them out with a toothbrush, a real soft brush when you do it. And it'll get rid of most of that. Or even take a toothpick and very lightly kind of run it over that until it comes out. Well, that's the polishing. Alright, so I've gone through and spent the last couple hours masking all this stuff off, getting ready for secondary details. Getting ready to spray the flat black details on the alt mode parts, like the roof section here, and then the side vents behind the side windows. Also the vents on the deck lid. Gonna get those sprayed in flat black, and then these obviously they go to right there. They're the side vents, so those will get them as well. Going to be doing Alclad on a few spots, his rifle, then also the shin details, so I've masked off for those. I'm going to be doing the feet as well, but some of you guys have seen my previous projects, especially my Prime trailer. Sometimes it requires multiple maskings of the same part to get a nice sharp line and not have any overspray. So the feet are still attached to this. That's why I've masked them off. They're already coated in gloss black and they're ready for Alclad, but I don't want anything getting on them, so I'll have to unmask all this and then mask it again to do the Alclad on this, which, I mean, it's one of those things, sometimes you have to do a little bit of extra work to get it right, but it's worth it in the end. And then originally I was going to paint the little detail around the taillights here with flat black, but I did a little bit more research, and actually the outer part of this that I've unmasked is actually part of the lens. From Takara, this actually came with it as black, but it's inaccurate. It's actually a lens show. And then also I noticed that the outer lens on there is the turn signal indicator, which is supposed to be amber. So rather than go through and do multiple different colors on here, what I've done is I just went ahead and brushed on some yellow, and I'm going to hit this with the stoplight red metallic. I'll go ahead and airbrush a quick coat over that, and that'll turn that amber. But what I wanted to show you is on some of these smaller parts it's a little bit difficult to keep tape stuck to them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use liquid mask on the reverse indicator light right there. I've already put one coat on it. I'm going to put a second coat real quick. I'll show you guys how I do it. Just a quick demonstration. Nothing fancy here. I'm sure some of you guys have used this stuff before. I use the micro mask, liquid masking. The beauty part about this stuff, like I mentioned before, is it's water soluble. It says right here on it, you know, cleans up with water. So ideally you do not want to use this for water-based paints like acrylics. It's better suited for enamels and lacquers. So usually I try to put 2 good coats on it, and I'll use a detail brush on these smaller parts just so that I don't have to cut a line. You know, I can just brush right up to the edge of the piece that I'm masking. And then, like I mentioned before, I do these secondary details before I do my final polishing. So this is going to get soaked in water anyway, which will dissolve this mask, which is the beauty part, so you don't have to try and pick it off. It can be peeled, it can be cut and trimmed, but I generally save it for stuff like this that I don't have to trim it, just because, you know, you get a fairly straight sharp line with a good tape if you got enough practice with it. So I just save it for stuff like this. So just a quick little coat on there, try and get all the way up to your edges. I'll probably come in and panel line these after I've sprayed the stoplight red on it and kind of sharpen those up a little bit, and that's pretty much it. So I'm going to let these dry for about an hour before I spray them, and then when I come back I'll show you guys the flat black, just a real quick run through on that, and then also try to get ready for some Alclad as well. And then from there it'll be just a matter of doing you know, final details, doing some dry brush work, and then also some light edge wear, and then it'll be ready for assembly. So see you then. Alright, so I'm spraying some black here, I got one of my airbrushes loaded up with flat black lacquer, and then another one for gloss black lacquer. So I'm going through and coating the weapon, his rifle here. I'm getting this ready for Alclad, so this is going the gloss black. This is already 2 coats. You can see it's still got some of the original base color showing through. You don't want these too thick, just like everything else. Obviously it's getting Alclad on the top, so you don't want to build it up too heavy so you don't have chipping. And then also you really need to make sure that when you do this that you get a good shiny flat gloss coat on it. So because any imperfections, any of the orange peel, anything like that will show through in the Alclad. So you want to do it in very, very light coats. So I've got this one at 20 psi. I had it. Let's see. Okay, there we go. That's about 25. So I'll just do a real quick. Sometimes with the thinner paints, sometimes even black, it'll take more than 3 coats if it's really thin like this is to get it to lay down. So I'm just going to build it up slow until I get, well, a few of the spots, like right in here, it's getting pretty flat. It's almost ready. When I say flat, I'm not talking about the sheen, I'm talking about the surface of the paint. Sometimes you can even increase the pressure a little bit to push more paint. Depends on, you know, if it's hot or if it's humid. Sometimes actually increasing your pressure to push a higher volume of paint will help it lay down a little better. Today's a little warmer than usual, that's why I'm spraying it a little bit higher. I'm actually going to bump it up to about 30 pounds. Just so I can get this to lay down a little better with less coats. Yeah, see, that was a lot better. You have to play around with your settings sometimes and experiment depending on your location to get it right. You can't always go by what everybody else tells you to spray at. You know, that's almost perfect right there. That's on the 3rd coat, so that piece I can stop on as well as this other shin piece. The rifle will have to dry some more before I can hit it again, so I'll set that one aside. But I've got my flat black here. I got that a little bit lower because I'm spraying over red now, so the likelihood of getting overspray under tape if you haven't masked it off really well is a lot higher, and especially, you know, black over red, you don't want to see that. So I've lowered the pressure a bit just so I don't blow the tape up. And then also you don't need to really go too heavy with it, so with the lower pressure you can kind of fog it in rather than spray a good heavy coat. That's not too bad. And you always want to spray perpendicular to the tape. If I've got tape right there on an edge, I don't want to spray directly at it. That'll increase your chances of going under it. it's lacquered, so it dries fairly fast, especially with the flat. The flat seems to dry the fastest. So, those, you know, since they're not on a raised edge, they're not going to be touched. It's not vital that you lay it down like you would a normal coat for a base coat on your regular parts. They're not going to be touched, so they'll probably never get rubbed or chipped or anything like that. And I probably won't even clear coat over these. A common misconception, especially with customs, is that you have to totally clear coat everything and seal everything in. It's not really true. It's not 100% necessary to go through and clear coat everything that you paint, especially on stuff like this where it's never going to get touched really. Nothing's going to rub against it. Your hands will probably never touch it really, and even if it does, it's not enough contact for it to rub paint off. If you use a more durable paint, it's still really not necessary. A lot of people like to. Me, I prefer to have the contrast, so the less I mess with it, the better. I want it to, you know, pop and kind of contrast against the rest of the coats, which, you know, obviously are going to be high gloss buffed. So clear coating it isn't totally necessary. A lot of people kind of think that, you know, clear coat is some miracle cure that gets rid of chipping and scratching and all that and whatnot. It's not. It's just paint. It's clear paint. It just doesn't have pigment in it, you know, like the rest of your stuff. All clear really does is prevent surface scratches into your base coat. So if you're really concerned with it, you can, but it isn't totally necessary. Especially, like I said, if you use a more durable paint, then, you know, all you're doing is adding thickness to whatever it is you painted and increasing your chances of chipping. So these parts, like I said, I'm not going to clear coat them. So I'll go through and finish up the flat black, and then next I'll show you how I do the Alclad, and then I'll jump into some buffing and final details and start assembly. Okay, real quick, I'll show you the stoplight red. What I've done is I just dumped some thinner in here first. I'm going to backwash it a little bit to kind of mix it after I put some paint in it. It's another way you can thin your paints. If you got something that a color that you like to use for hand brushing, but you want to spray it, obviously it's got to be thinner to spray than it does for hand brushing. You can just load a little bit of thinner into your airbrush first and then pour some of that paint in there and then just plug the tip and backwash it so the bubbles will turn it up and mix it up. But I'll just do a quick shot here. My liquid mask is dried, so I can go ahead and spray these. I'll probably do 2 or 3 coats on this, but I'll just show you this one real quick. The yellow is what I wanted you to see. You can see it's kind of turning amber. It's just little tricks and stuff that I picked up along the way. Blending colors and whatnot. That way you don't have to worry about so much trying to get a perfect coat on a hand brushing color. You can do stuff like this to change it up. So I'll do, you know, 2 or 3 coats on this, and then I'll remove the masking, mask again, and then do all the black that still needs to be done on these parts. catch them up to the rest. But you can see the liquid masking is holding up pretty good. Next will be Alclad. Alright, so now we're ready for some Alclad. All the black is dried, and as you can see, it's a pretty glossy coat, which is what you need for this stuff to actually work. The way this stuff works, and I've got a couple of different ones that I use. These ones I'm going to be spraying with the airframe aluminum, but since I got a little bit more in the chrome jar, I'll show you. That's the pigment in this stuff, and you can see it's not a whole lot because this jar is actually about half full. So that's the pigment. You want to spray it about as thin as that ratio is, you know, versus a regular coat over the top of this. So it really doesn't take a lot to get the effect to work. Where it comes into play is when you have a really nice shiny gloss coat, gives it the sheen, but this just barely dusted onto the surface is what gets the color. And you can see when I start to shake it up, you know, that it's really, really fine particles of the metal flake. So you need to bear that in mind when you're spraying this stuff. It's not like regular paint where you just, you know, spray on a real heavy coat and think that it's going to work, because it won't. It'll actually just turn into a really nice fine silver if you do it with this particular color anyway. But I use the airframe aluminum a lot of times just because, you know, versus the chrome. It's a little bit darker. It's kind of hard to see because there's not much left. I use this quite a bit. But you have to spray this stuff at roughly about 12 psi. It'll tell you on the jar too that, you know, you need to be 12 to 15. I do it at 12. And then I'll show you real quick how I get this stuff to work. A lot of guys will do it different ways. This is just how I do it. Looks like I'm probably gonna polish off the rest of this bottle here. Set that aside. But I got it at 12 psi, and what I do is very, very lightly press the trigger. I'm not pushing it all the way down, and I just want to dust it on. I better put the cap because I do tend to shake my hand quite a bit when I do this. You just very lightly dust this on. You only want to go until you get the desired depth of the color that you want, and then you stop. You can see how it's already starting to turn on us. You can see as I go how it's ever so gently turning the color that you want. That's pretty much how you do that. You don't want to go too heavy with this stuff. Like I said, it's going to lose that effect if you do it too heavy. And one coat is all it takes. You can see right here there's still a little bit of black showing. You just very lightly build that back up. piece real quick again so you can see. I'm barely pulling the trigger here. And that's all it takes. They say that you can buff this stuff. In my experience, buffing it will tend to rub some of the stuff off the edges, especially. I only buff it if I'm going for like a worn look with this, which I may do just for fun. It gives it a little bit of a kind of a rustic look to it without losing the sheen. But like I said, it does tend to remove some of the stuff off of it when you do that. So as long as I've done it this way, I've never had to buff it. I always tend to keep the depth of the color that I like and the sheen without buffing. So again, it's one of those things you kind of have to experiment with and play around until you find the right combination. But this seems to work the best for me, so that's how I do it. So I'll go through and finish up these other two pieces real quick, and then move into some buffing, and then also final detail. Alright, real quick, just one more of my little tricks that I tend to do. When I'm painting wheels, you can see I've already shot the metallic color on the center of the rim. Basically just throw a piece of tape over it and then use the crevice tool to trace around the edge of the wheel lip, and then cut that out first, then spray spray whatever your wheel color is going to be. And then one other thing I like to do, kind of just, you know, a little bit of realism to these things. When you look at a tire, obviously if they've armor-alled the sidewall of it, the tread's still going to be rough. So you'll have that difference between a gloss and a flat finish. So there's two ways that I do it. This way, it's a little bit easier when you have an edge on the tread that you can trace and cut out. Then I'll just keep everything masked, cut the sidewall out, and then spray this all in gloss to seal everything on these. And then the tread pattern will stay flat. Gives a little bit of a custom touch, a little bit of contrast to it. But you just spray your gloss clear. And then when you unmask those wheels, you'll have that little bit of contrast to it. And I'll unmask one here in a second. There's just a quick look here. Up. So now you can see the little bit of contrast between the sidewall and the tread. Just a little extra touch, something that I'd like to do. But the other way to do it is if you have no way to trace that line to separate the tread from the sidewall, you can coat the whole thing in gloss, and then just take some of that 1200 grit sandpaper and scuff up the outside, you know, the tread on the wheel, and then just that little extra touch. Alright, so I've gone through and buffed all the parts that I'm gonna buff, so it's more or less ready for assembly at this point. I still have a little bit of dry brushing to do, but I kind of want to do it while it's assembled. That way I can kind of judge a little bit better how much dry brushing I want to add to it, and there's a reason for that. One of the consequences of buffing too much or not laying down enough clear when you do these is you can buff through into the color coat, and I'll show you a couple of spots where I actually did that. You can see right here through to the primer, also along this edge, and also I got a little overzealous with the hood section here and actually buffed into the decal, but all hope is not lost. I was intentionally going for a little bit of a worn look, not too worn, but a little worn, so I'm actually going to leave it. It's not too bad. Just those little edges that I buffed through. I got a couple others like right there. Those little ones that I've gone through, I guess they kind of add to the edge wear look in the alt mode. I generally tend to avoid putting edge wear marks and whatnot with the brush on the alt mode parts, but since that's actually kind of how a worn look would look, you can see another one at the top edge of the door here. I'm gonna leave it. It actually looks kind of cool now that I'm looking at it, but if you did want to avoid that and you don't want to have those types of marks, two ways you can go about it. Number one, you can do an extra layer of clear. When we went through and did these, I did 4. So to prevent that, you can add another layer of clear and go 5. That's one way to get rid of it. And then also not going as high with your sanding grit. I believe we stopped at 8,000, I think, or 6,000. You can step it down to just 4 and still get a reasonably good shine to it when you polish it. And then also not buffing so much. You can see right here in these couple of spots where if you start to see your base coat color in the rag while you're buffing, then you've gone too far. The polishing compound itself actually has a little tiny bit of a grit to it, so that's how it gets the polished look. So you have to be very careful when you're buffing this thing with that polishing compound, because you can go through with just the compound. So at this point, like I said, I'm going to start going through and assembling some of this, and then I'll show you guys the final edge wear detail and panel lining, and then from there it should be ready to go. Alright, so I got this guy all assembled and ready to rock now. All my dry brushing is done. I went ahead and these little shoulder pieces, originally I wanted to do those in Alclad, but I decided to give it a little bit more contrast with some heavy dry brushing, the chrome silver on those. You can see the chrome silver dry brush versus the aluminum. It does, I mean, in the jar they kind of look similar, but they do have a little bit of a different color to it once you dry brush them over the black. So like I had mentioned earlier, because I had buffed through some of the corners and also through the faction logo on the chest, I'm going to go ahead and go with a little bit more worn look to this. So I'm going to add some more edge wear. I'll probably go through, you know, most of the bot parts and do that. And then what I use is just the regular chrome silver testers with my little rat tail brush. Get a little bit on there, and then I just kind of ride the edge at about a 45-degree angle. You gotta make sure your paint's pretty thin when you do this. And it's okay if the brush bounces a little bit, it actually kind of adds to the effect. But you just want to lightly hit those edges as you go. You don't want to get too much on them. But the reason I do it at this point is, you know, with the figure assembled, you can kind of see how your details are coming along if you've overdone it or underdone it. Versus doing them individually, you know, you can tend to get a little crazy with some of your details, and then when you put it all together, it just looks like a cluttered mess. And like I also mentioned before, you know, I do kind of go for a less is more type approach to these. So I don't want to overdo this. There is such a thing as too much wear and tear on them, in my opinion anyway. just go part by part and add some little bit of highlighting here. Nothing too crazy. If you want, you know, you can do little scratches, you know, quick scratches like that. It's one of the ways I do it, but I try to hit every edge just gently. You can kind of carry off some of your marks like that and create some pretty crazy scratches. I was never real fond of this style until recently. Now I kind of got the hang of it. I'm starting to like it a lot more. And like I had mentioned, as long as you don't touch it while it's still drying, it'll set up pretty decently and you don't have to worry about sealing it in, especially since we're using enamel. In fact, if you were to try and clear over these details, you do run the risk of reactivating the enamel, and either A, it'll just run and it won't look like it does right now, or B, it can even totally wipe it out. Especially with this chrome silver, I've noticed putting clear over it, it changes the color depth of it significantly. So I prefer to do details with this particular paint last. But at this point, pretty much all I have left to do is to finish up this edge wear. I'll go throughout it, you know, even the white parts. When I do white, I tend to hit those with a darker color that I've mixed up. This is actually flat black with aluminum, and I use this when I do any of the lighter colored parts like gray or white or silver, or I'll probably put a little bit on these Alclad pieces down here after I panel line them. But I've still got a little bit of panel lining left to do in throughout here, and then edge wear, and then this guy's pretty much done. You can see right here I went through, I think I had mentioned earlier that I use, which color is that? It's the True Blue Pearl. It's already a transparent color, but when you mix in a bit more thinner, you can use it as a wash or for panel lining. So I try to mix up the details on this, and you know, I'll do it in the end of the weapon too as well. But just little touches like that. And then the other thing I forgot to mention too is I'll have to come back and hand paint the handles on these where I've clipped on my alligator clip. That's one of the things that I tend to do at this stage, try and go back and clean up any small details like that that I've left out. I'll also hit these little inner fender wells inside of there are poking through, so I want to hit those in flat black to blend them in. But for the most part, he's pretty much about 95 to 98% done. So that's pretty much how I do most of my customs, if not all of them. There's little variations that I might do on certain ones here and there. I didn't really touch on pre-shading or post-shading on this particular one. It's a little bit more of an advanced technique. I figured this would be enough for a start for some guys to get familiar with some of these techniques before you start getting into stuff like that. But again, if any of you guys have any questions on anything I've gone over here, or you think I might have missed something, I can try to include it in another custom later down the road. That way, most, if not all, of your questions will be answered. Let's see, try this guy out in the shoulder here. But that Sideswipe, just a little comparison shot. So you can kind of see what we've done. Hope everybody enjoyed this. Hope somebody out there somewhere learned something. And stay tuned for future features coming on my Barbershop Customs Facebook page, and then also I tend to share as jbarb78 on tfw or tfw2005.com. So enjoy.